Hello and welcome to the Off the Party Line podcast. I am your host, Mark Williams, and I'm joined today by my wonderful co-host, Mr. Peter Farrington. Peter, how are you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing well, thanks. Yeah,
Great.
doing well.
This is
It's only
exciting.
taken us about 3 hours to get to this point.
I had a lot more cables than I thought I had, which I think has actually turned out to be pretty helpful.
Yes, in the end.
Yeah, in the end. If your wife ever tells you you need to get rid of all your cables, just say, but what if at one point I need to set up a podcast? It's the answer.
Yeah, hold on to them.
Hold on to them. We've used all of my cables in my house. Anyway, today what we're going to do is we are going to watch a clip from the Modern Wisdom podcast. Have you ever watched the Modern Wisdom podcast, Pete?
I have. I've watched a few. Yeah, not this one though.
Not this one, yeah. So Chris Williamson is the host, very good host, and he is talking to Alex O'Connor, who is, I mean, I would call him an atheist. He calls himself an agnostic.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah.
It's always an interesting distinction, I find.
Yeah. And I think I first watched him about in 2019.
Oh, okay.
It has been interesting to see how, just his journey and how he's, I don't know, it feels like he's moved from being a militant atheist to, an agnostic or, I don't know. But
yeah, I don't know loads about him. I've seen clips. He's a very clippable guy, isn't he? So seems to me to have gone from quite a Dawkins-esque sort of atheist to a bit more of a... Now, this clip is very interesting. So you've not seen this yet. So we're going to watch this and react to it. But actually the last line is the most interesting for me. I'm not going to put anything onto him of like, he's starting to believe, because I don't think that's true. However, we'll get into it, but he argues this as though you'll hear a lot of what you will have understood as Christian apologetics.
Okay.
In it. So Chris Williamson is not a believer and doesn't seem to be as knowledgeable about, Christianity and the Bible. But the way Alex talks is like he's a Christian trying to persuade him. Interesting. Anyway, should we get into it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Great. So here he is on Modern Wisdom. Let's hear what he's got to say.
You think, generally speaking, with all of these kinds of things, fine-tuning, consciousness is another example that's broadly in the scientific realm that people think like this just can't be explained without reference to a god. Maybe they're right, I don't know. But if you intuitively were to step into a time machine and look at some people having this conversation, and you said, like imagine them looking back and saying, gosh, can you believe it? They hadn't worked out fine-tuning yet. They hadn't figured out the constants. They hadn't figured out the science of consciousness yet. I can conceive of that. Just intuitively, I can see someone doing that. But when I think about my arguments for atheism, the problem of evil, divine hidden, this kind of stuff, I can't imagine somebody looking through a time machine similarly at a conversation that I have and going, gosh, can you believe it? They hadn't worked out the problem of evil yet. They hadn't worked out divine hiddenness yet. I think these are perennial problems.
So that's interesting already.
Yeah.
These are perennial problems. I've seen similar things by... Ricky Gervais sort of at one point said, if we lost all of our literature, all of it, all the religious and all the scientific, at some point we would rewrite all the maths books and science books because they're constant, whereas Leviticus is lost and we'll never get it back. It seems to be a sort of similar argument. Like we as Christians would not ever be able to imagine a scenario where we've lost all the literature because, God is sovereign, God has his plan, and he's working that out. So whenever I hear things like that, it's sort of an interesting thought experiment, but not one that as a Christian you can really entertain.
Yes. Yeah. And there'd be maybe certain aspects of, you could imagine people still writing about their ideas of there being a God and there being more than the material. But actually, the specifics of the Christian faith is like, how would you ever get to that point?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, let's carry on.
So where you have these scientific arguments for the existence of God, I guess I just have more of a trust that they will one day be explained in a way that won't require recourse to a divine author, in a way that my criticisms of religion will probably not be similarly resolved.
We had a great conversation in Austin as you explained to me about the potential historical accuracy or inaccuracy of Jesus' resurrection. Can you go through that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, this sometimes is used as an argument for the existence of God, but I think more successfully is used once you've already established the existence of God to try to establish the truth of Christianity. And that is a bunch of historical facts surrounding Jesus's alleged resurrection that you sort of have to ask what the best explanation is for. Now, you can't historically prove a resurrection, but you can historically prove events.
So this is where it's going to get interesting, right? So I've heard a lot of Christian apologists go through these. Now, as he says, the starting point here is actually you have to have assumed that you've already, you agree that there is a God, and now you're going, is it the Christian God? So, yeah, let's carry on and see what he says, but it's really interesting.
And then ask what the best explanation of those facts is. So people will often point to the fact that there was a man called Jesus walking around morally teaching people who was crucified by the Romans, and that a few days after his death was seen, or people made claims that they'd seen him after he'd died. And the question is, how do you explain these facts? The gospel reliability is an interesting question in general, and people will often, on the surface level, say, look, the Bible contradicts itself. It's full of contradictions. And
so he's going to make this point, but I was watching Mike Winger recently, and he made this point about a lot of people will say the Bible contradicts itself. You'll have heard this before. Yeah. What do you say when people say the Bible's got contradictions? It contradicts itself.
I just think that the more that I've looked into places where I'd previously thought there were contradictions, and looked at what specific passages in the Bible were actually talking about, and the context, I think I've always found my questions answered.
Yeah.
And so now when I see something that I don't understand, or that looks at first glance like a contradiction, I take a step back and kind of think, well, okay, that there are a lot of very, very clever people who've written books about this for like 2,000 years, and I'm not just going to assume that. I've got no reason to assume that. That there is a contradiction before actually looking into it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the point that Mike Winger was making is, you have to assume that the people who put the canon together weren't stupid.
Yeah.
It's very easy for particularly modern people to look back and think, well, they didn't know what they were doing back then. I mean, they built unbelievable structures and wrote incredible things and thought incredible things and philosophy and all these things. So it's probably more sensible to assume if you see a contradiction, they would have spotted that before they put it in, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like they're not dumb.
Yeah.
And Alex is going to make a similar point. But as I say, that's a Christian apologetic typically. But I get frustrated sometimes with atheists who will reject some of these foundational things that actually they don't even need to disagree with to be an atheist. Anyway, let's see.
There are some seeming contradictions in the gospel stories, but of course, what a lot of people neglect to consider is that when we're talking about a text as a historical document, contradictions shouldn't make us think that it's like less accurate, but more accurate. If historical sources contradict each other, that's evidence of their accuracy rather than evidence of the opposite. People
cannot get their heads around this. And so Chris Williamson straight away, how?
Yeah.
It's always fascinated me when people have said, and I, to be honest, at one point, I went through a period where I thought, maybe they've got a point here. But listen to his explanation. It's a good one.
Because if this is a mythical story that somebody's making up, you would expect the details to concur. That is, if you're questioning two suspects in some kind of murder trial or something, and their stories match up perfectly, like to the T, the timings, everything, it arouses suspicion. It seems like somebody's inventing something. Someone's coming up with a story here and trying to perfect it. Now, people have this idea that a bunch of people got together and tried to fool the world into this sort of mythical story of this man rising from the dead. Do you think they would have made the mistake of just including these blatant contradictions?
Interesting. Yeah. It is interesting because he sounds like he's speaking like a believer, someone who really believes that this is the word of God. And yeah, I think it, and something I've heard before as well is that there are, particularly in the gospel stories, across the four gospels, you've got details that are added in some of them that you don't see in others, and which also adds to the reliability of it, because people are writing from different perspectives and seeing things from different perspectives, and maybe wanting to focus on certain aspects of the story of what was going on.
Right,
and
the narrative slightly different.
Yeah. Whereas, you wouldn't expect to see that if this had all been made up. You'd want them there to be consistency across the board, in all four gospels.
Exactly right. Yeah, let's carry on.
I don't know. In other words, I think if somebody was making it up, they probably would have taken more care.
Is there a term for this?
I'm sure there is.
Right.
I'm not a historian. I couldn't tell you what it is.
Right.
But we do see contradictions on the minor points. We don't really see much disagreement about the major points. I mean, there is still enough disagreement that I think to arouse suspicion. I mean, I'm saying this as if I'm some kind of Christian or theist. I sort of put on that hat when I'm asked to have a conversation of this kind. I mean, it does seem to me suspicious, for example, that the Gospel of Mark, which is the earliest gospel, contains no post-resurrection appearances. And then the Gospel of Matthew does include post-resurrection appearances. The Gospel of Luke includes even more. It's only in the Gospel of John that we get, for instance, doubting Thomas, which is the latest gospel, canonical gospel, I should say. That's where that arises. And in fact, the story of doubting Thomas, famously, he doesn't believe that it's the risen Christ. And Jesus says, "Come and touch my wounds." And he touches his wounds and he says, "My Lord and my God." And Jesus says, "You believe because you've seen. Blessed are those who believe without seeing."
So this is one thing I really do appreciate about this guy, actually, is when he talks, he does actually know what he's talking about to an extent. I mean, I don't know, really how much, from a theological perspective he knows and understands, but he knows those verses.
He's clearly read through it.
He's clearly read it, but he's clearly talked to Christians. Some of these lines seem to me verbatim, as you say, Christian apologetics. And okay, he's making a critique of God, which we've heard before, that potentially actually maybe these have evolved and they're picking up more of the story and they're
getting more fantastical as they go along.
Yeah, more fantastical, and also getting more to a point where the authors are trying to maybe persuade people. And they're coming up against resistance, so they're adding things to overcome the resistance. I think the point that he's trying to make.
Seeing what people might respond with, but what about this?
Now, from my perspective, whether or not that's true, that doesn't necessarily make it make the stories themselves untrue. So, for instance, you might be, even if you go to a scientific theory and you teach what it is, you would then, your second lecture would almost certainly pivot on the basis of the questions you were asked at the end of the first one, right? So you'll get your questions from, I'm struggling with this, or how can that be true if this? So you come armed next time with, so it's possible that it's that, and actually there's more of the details of the story, because I mean, is it John's Gospel, at the end of John's Gospel, maybe, where he says, not everything is included in this book or something, and is it John?
Yeah.
But I've included these things that you might believe. So there's loads of things they could have told. The story was huge, And what we see in the Gospels is not necessarily all of it. I don't know what you think about that.
Well, and the thing is as well, in regards to the specifics of the story of Jesus appearing to Thomas and speaking like that to him, it's like, what are you wanting of Jesus? What do you want him to do? Because if Jesus obviously knows that people outside of the people within those four walls are going to doubt because they haven't seen him and touched the wounds and whatever. So is Jesus not allowed to speak to those people because others, atheists, are going to say, oh no, but you've just added that in. It's like,
well, ultimately, I guess, that did happen even before any of the Gospels were written. Yeah. And I guess his contention would be, well, why wouldn't you include that? My point would be, there's loads of things not included in all of the Gospels. We know of that there's fleeting passages that talk of great events that go into no detail about them.
Yes.
And you think, I would love to know. Well, we don't know.
Yeah.
We just don't know.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting criticism, one I just don't think necessarily you don't need to draw a conclusion from it, is what I guess I would say. Yeah. Anyway, should we carry on?
So in my view, what we have is this so-called mythological development of no post-resurrection appearances, and as the time goes on, as we get further away from the source, the stories get more fantastical, ending in a moral lesson to believe without evidence. Yes.
Yeah.
This to me does seem a little bit suspicious. So it is a fascinating mystery. Like something very strange happened on Easter morning, because how do we explain the fact that this man gets crucified by the Romans?
So just to interrupt, this is where it's going to get really interesting, because what he's just said is as skeptical as I think he's going to be. Okay. So from here on out, just listen to this.
And then people claim to see him after he died and were willing to be put to death for that belief. Now, okay, maybe he didn't die. Unlikely. As they say, the Romans knew how to kill people. And supposedly, they check. And they go to break the legs of the other prisoners as they're taking them down from their crosses. They were taking them down sort of temporarily, and they hadn't died yet. But when they go to break Jesus's legs, they realize he's already dead, which is why.
So he doesn't actually elucidate this, but that is scripturally very relevant, right?
Yeah.
So from the crucifixion point of view and the historical point of view, they would break the legs, as far as I remember, in order to quicken the death.
Yeah.
Right? So they're up there, they're not dying. Come on, get on with it.
Yeah.
They break the legs so that they can't hold themselves up, and therefore they asphyxiate quicker. The fact that they don't do that to Jesus is prophetically important, right?
Does he pick up on this?
No.
Because that's at the same, we've said that he knows to an extent what he's talking about, but he also doesn't, because he's not. And I've seen him do this. I think when he was on that Jubilee podcast, where they're like surrounded.
25 and 1. Yeah.
So it's 25 Christians and 24 Christians, 1 Mormon.
Yes, I do.
But there were a couple of times
for episode 1.
There are a couple of times in that one as well where you could just tell he's not seeing things through a wide angle lens of all of Scripture all at once.
Yes,
and so he's honing in on specific things without taking into account that prophecy is a big one. Yeah,
exactly. Is it Isaiah?
Where
it talks about that. So for those who don't know, it talks about the lamb will be the sacrificial lamb, but its bones won't be broken, right? So the idea there is, if they'd broken his legs, that would have not fulfilled the prophecy. The very fact that it was common for them to break the legs and they didn't, fulfills the prophecy. So he doesn't pick up on that, but it's interesting to note.
And a prophecy that you can't possibly have any choice in what's going on there. You're already dead. So it's like, this wasn't.
That's right.
You could say about some of the prophecies. You can have. You can kind of try and orchestrate things, but not about where you were born or
no, if you're nailed up to a cross, you are pretty much at the mercy of whatever anyone's going to do to you, aren't you? Yeah. But it's important that they don't break his legs. So hopefully at one point he'll learn that.
Yeah, and he was pierced for our transgressions.
Well, right, and that's the bit that he does note that does happen.
Okay.
Yeah. He doesn't note the prophecy, but he does note that that's what happened.
His legs don't get broken, and they stab him in the side with a stick to make sure that he's dead. I mean, like, this was a very effective method of killing people, and they knew how to do it. So it's unlikely that he just somehow survived this.
Is that the guy that stabbed him with the spear and supposedly there's blood on the spear? Or was this? Did he get stabbed?
Someone stabs him with the spear, like after he's on the cross.
Well, yeah, and just to be completely clear, they stab him with the spear to check he's dead, but it's not blood on the spear; it's blood and water, right, mixed together.
Yeah,
which is important, and not just important from the story's perspective, but the fact that it's blood and water coming out of the lungs shows that he's dead. If it's just blood, you could say that he might still be alive, but the fact that it records that it's blood and water is important to show, because it goes to rebut this sense of, well, maybe he wasn't dead. Well, he definitely was.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And it's essentially to check he's dead. Okay, so likelihood is that he was actually crucified. And then a few days later, people are claiming to see him. Maybe they're lying, but then you don't tend to go to death for something you know to be a lie. You're willing to be put to death for things that you think are true, that are false, but very rarely are people willing to die for beliefs that they don't actually believe themselves.
I used to really... there was a point at which I took this argument from atheists and thought this is a fair one, because they would say, well, there are very extremist Muslims who will blow themselves up for their faith. And I say, yeah, I do think they believe what they say they believe. And I actually think it's very important that we accept that they believe what they say they believe. The difference here is we are not... The difference here is that those Muslims are 1,400 years away from their original prophet. The people we're talking about here saw Jesus.
Yeah. It's completely different. It's completely different. Like, if you... there's just no way that you would have... like, who has ever died for something that they know to be alive?
There's things that I'm absolutely certain of in the physical that I think at the point of being threatened with death and someone saying, well, I recorded that event and it's different to what you say. So you can either admit that it's wrong or even admit that you're not sure, and we'll stop the whole death process. But if you say you're convinced and we show the video and it tells you you're lying, then you're done. I think even in some of the strongest things, I would absolutely say, even in that moment, I'd probably go, I'm just going to say I'm not sure.
Yeah.
At the point of death.
Yeah. And when it's not just one person, this is a huge number of people who were eyewitnesses to these things, or who lived within, who were hearing these things from eyewitnesses. Like, how you get hundreds of people to do that. I don't know where you would look in history for something.
And this
like
is
that.
what I think is really commendable about Alex, because he's saying, no, they believed it. Whatever happened, they believed it. So let's hear what he's got to say.
That doesn't really happen. So they probably weren't lying. As maybe they were mistaken,
fooled.
Yeah. Now, I've known you since about 2019, which is probably it will have been slightly longer than Jesus was with his disciples. But imagine spending every single day with this person, living with this person, eating with this person, and then You've only seen him a few days ago. And somehow, imagine somebody managed to convince you that they were me. Even if I had a twin brother, they probably wouldn't be able to convince you that it was me. Or maybe they were hallucinating in groups. One of the earliest gospel New Testament sources is the letters of Paul, the earliest. And in one of those letters, Paul refers to Jesus having appeared to 500 people all at once. And in some of the Gospels, you get at least some group appearances, at least more than one person, and sometimes, groups of disciple, the 12, all seeing Jesus all at once. You don't get group hallucinations like that. And so it doesn't seem like they were mistaken either. And so if they're not mistaken, they're not making it up. What explains the fact that these people claimed to see him after he had died?
Yeah. I've heard that before about hallucinations and how, it just doesn't happen for a whole group of people to be seeing the same thing at the same time.
Yep. Yeah, there's so many weak arguments against this, and it really does just belie the fact that people haven't thought it through. Now, I'm a Christian, so I believe in the resurrection. Now, that is not to say, I actually agree with what he said at the start. You can't prove historically the resurrection necessarily 100%.
Mm-hmm.
Fine. It really does come down to what your explanation of these events is. Now, people can very, very easily say, look, whatever it was weird, but people don't rise from the dead. I don't believe it. That is fine. You can take that position. But it's all these weird, like those group hallucinations. Oh, they were making stuff up. Oh, they pretended to see him. They got together and they decided.
Yeah. You have to start accepting arguments that wouldn't hold up in any other situation, because you've come to it with having already decided, well, no one ever comes back from the dead, and in rejecting that, you've got to accept other things that it's like, what is the most likely thing to have happened? And once you start going through all of these things, like the group hallucinations, the fact that most of the, it's widely accepted that most of the disciples were martyred. It's like, would they all have done that for something that they just made up when there's nothing in it for them?
Exactly. And you couldn't start picking off one by one people who were going, okay.
Yeah.
Out of all of these hundreds of people.
Yeah.
No, they all believed it, and they were all absolutely convinced that's what happened.
You couldn't get one.
Yeah, exactly.
And they couldn't present a body, all these things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We're getting towards the end of this, but what I really appreciate is, again, he is not accepting all those weak arguments, which he's correct not to do.
And the Christian apologists will say that the only real plausible explanation is that he really did rise from the dead. Now, it's an interesting argument, and it's quite powerful. However, my response has always been that this sort of process of elimination is very clever, and that's how it's usually run, but it can go the other way. I mean, imagine I were trying to prove that there was such thing as a group hallucination. I know it's extraordinary, but there was a group hallucination. And I tried to prove it by saying, well, what are the other explanations? Or maybe they lied. Well, they wouldn't do that because they wouldn't go to death. Or maybe a man rose from the dead, but come on, that doesn't happen.
So that, again, that's probably as fair as point at which you go, okay, but what you do have to accept at this point is something absolutely extraordinary happened. Something extraordinary happened.
Which had been predicted.
Well, that's the other thing. So when he says, well, if I were to try and prove group hallucination, I would go, you wouldn't lie, men don't rise from the dead. Well, Isaiah didn't say that there was going to be group hallucinations. Neither did any no one had ever predicted any of this stuff. But the things that happened to Jesus, his life maps against the prophecies so well that you also have to start to address that as well.
Within the same conversation.
No, you can do. I'm sure there'd be plenty of people who will finagle their way out of, well, it didn't really mean that, or they could have made that up, or Jesus maybe wasn't in better. Have all those arguments that you like, but that particular one on the surface is a good one until you go,
yeah.
Well, but what I do appreciate, again, we are at the point where, well, something happened. We agree. We agree that something happened, and I really like how this finishes.
That breaks all the laws of physics. So the only remaining option is this. Kind of depends where you start. But it is weird. Something very strange seems to have happened on that morning.
It is fascinating to see him wrestle with, because like I said, I've been watching him for a few years, and to see where he's at now, where he's come to a place where he's not just flat out rejecting it all, and he's really looking into it. He's speaking to a lot of people and going into these conversations with good faith. And so that's
it. He's, I think that's why, again, he would say he's an agnostic, which is a very fair enough position. But I just love that last line. Essentially, all said and done, but it is weird.
Yeah.
Something extraordinary happened on that morning. Yes, it did.
Yeah.
Something absolutely extraordinary happened on that morning. And my prayer for Alex is that he sees what that was.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And if that extraordinary thing wasn't Jesus being raised from the dead, what was it?
Correct. Yeah. So extraordinary. Brilliant clip that. As I really, really appreciate Alex and his thinking. And I think I've seen Chris Williamson talk to, some other apologists, and I don't think he's quite there. But again, we pray that he gets there. But I think we're going to wrap it up there for today. So any final thoughts, Pete, on that?
Yeah, we're looking forward to the next one.
Great.
It's been great to chat.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Hopefully not another 3-hour setup next time, and we'll get this absolutely nailed. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This has been Off Party Line. If you did like this video, please do give it a like and subscribe to the channel. We're going to be bringing a lot more videos to you. Thank you so much for watching. If you like that, please do remember to give us a nice big thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more episodes that are coming soon, please subscribe to the channel. We've got plenty more coming your way.